Hey friends, Dean here. Before we get you on to your episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to our next virtual online trivia night. Wednesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Join us either on our Facebook group or on our YouTube page for 3 rounds of fun trivia, music questions, movie questions, general knowledge questions. It'll be a fun time and a chance to win some prizes and have just a good relaxing night of some trivia at home. You don't even have to go out for it. So don't forget, Wednesday, March 13th at 8 p.m. Join us on our Facebook group or YouTube for 3 rounds of fun virtual online trivia. We'll see you there. Travel back with us to 1966 as we discuss what many have considered to be one of the greatest albums ever recorded, ourselves included. It's time for the Beach Boys' timeless classic, Pet Sounds. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff, and Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. We believe it is the home for the greatest in music and movie podcasting. Eric came up with that, so I'm going to take his word for it. I believe him. You should believe him as well.
You should, because it is. So it is. I've said it, and that's it. So,
and if it's on the internet, it must be true. And if you're listening to this, you must be listening to it on the internet. So that, by default, makes that a true statement.
Yeah,
if absolutely. We go by everything we know about the internet,
that's right. We're there,
or we could be
proud. We're here to stay, so there it is.
Knowing the internet, this could be like the biggest untruth ever, but we don't think so. we give you weekly episodes of music and movies, and we have a great time doing it. And we're glad you joined us for this very special episode. This is one that's been in the pocket for a while. What do you say?
Yeah, I think so. And it is.
If Eric had his way, I'll just say this: if Eric had his way, this would have been episode 1. Right? We're pretty close to it.
Well, yeah, probably in the first few, but Dean wouldn't let me. So we're not ready. We're not ready. And yeah, so this is a long time coming. So it is.
Eric kept pounding on the door, and I just wouldn't answer. I'm like, no one's home. No one's home. We're not. Nope. Sorry.
Yep.
And as we approach our 1-year anniversary, I think this is the right time for us to really celebrate this album, which. Is we're really going to hopefully give it the respect and the due that it deserves, and hopefully as a result of that, if you don't take our word for it about our passion, hopefully maybe just the story or the elements surrounding the recording of the album will intrigue you enough, to want to go listen to it, right? Because it's not just about this album or these songs; it's a lot about what was going on at the time as well, the recording of it.
Absolutely, it's a work of art. I'm just going to throw that right out the gate, right out there. It will stand as a work of art for all time, and that's just my opening statement about this record.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury,
there you go.
The defense rests.
Yeah,
but we're not going to rest. We are not going to rest with this album.
No.
We've got a lot to cover. It is absolutely one of our both of our favorites, and oddly enough, we came to it at different points. It's not something that we listened to together. Oddly enough. So you would think, oh, this is something that they both got. No, actually, no.
No,
actually,
and
quite the opposite.
Exactly. And but I think it's probably the definitive album that you and I connect with. And I think, and the reason for that being is because it's so progressive. So there's something in it for both of us. You're more into sort of the pop aspect. Yeah. I'm into the progressive side of it, and it's both. And that's it's a wonderful, wonderful combination. So, yeah.
Like I said, and I think for me, it's also the story about this album. And we're not going to, unfortunately, spend a lot of time on just Brian Wilson. We absolutely could do an episode. He is the main driver. He's going to be the main character in this story. We can kind of let you know right now. The rest of the Beach Boys are going to play a relatively minor role in this story because they kind of do on the album, not to undermine what they've done. And we're not going to do that, but let's get it started.
Okay.
Let's stop talking about what we're going to talk about and start talking about it.
Right? Let's get into it. Yeah.
So this was released in May of 1966. That would make it almost 56 years old.
Yeah.
Oddly enough. Number 10 on the charts, on the album charts, reached number 10. Number 2 on Rolling Stone's top 500 albums. We had spoken about that during our Sgt. Pepper episode, and we'll kind of circle back on that a little bit. There were 3 singles released from this album. Caroline, No, but that's the title. Number 30 hit number 32. Sloop John B hit number 3, and Wouldn't It Be Nice hit number 8. Just overall, just to kind of tie that up, at the time, this was not a hit for the Beach Boys. No, it was actually considered a miss. It was not something that performed up to what the Beach Boys standards were perceived to be at the time.
Right.
So although it had three singles, none of them were number ones, and the album just barely cracked the top 10, and then kind of disappeared. And at the time would be a lot more kinder to this album.
Yeah, not even the band really. I guess at the time thought it was, or I know Mike Love for sure didn't think that it was. It wasn't up to this, like you say, the standard of what they were doing and what they were used to doing. This was totally out of left field. This was something so avant-garde. I don't think anybody was kind of prepared for it, or they were scratching their heads with it. The record company was scratching their heads about it. They had it. What is this? I mean, it is. Time was the ultimate. The ultimate judge and the ultimate. And very kind to it. So and you say avant-garde, which is really very interesting, because we've talked in other episodes about the trajectory of bands, how they evolve, and the Beatles are going to figure into this as well, because the Beatles were and they acknowledged that they were the primary rivals, and Brian Wilson acknowledged that the Beatles were his target, that was what was motivating him to do what he was doing, not to copy the Beatles, because these bands don't sound anything alike, but they were both inspiring each other by what they were doing, and the Beatles were paying attention to what Brian Wilson was doing with the Beach Boys as well. Sure.
So just to kind of let's kind of set the pre-table for it. And we had talked about it a little. Again, we're going to reference the Sgt. Pepper episode a little bit, because it's a nice adjunct. These episodes will go nice together. So if you want to check that out as well. Brian Wilson had his share of stresses, maybe some borderline undiagnosed mental issues. Basically, has somewhat of a nervous breakdown in the mid 60s. Decides he does not want to tour anymore. He cannot handle the stresses of touring. So he says, I'm not touring anymore. You guys go out, get a replacement, which the first one was Glenn Campbell. It was the first replacement to kind of fill in. He just went in, and those striped shirts fit, and they put him out there, those Pendleton shirts. Got him out there, and eventually they got Bruce Johnston as a regular quote unquote fill-in. That allows Brian Wilson to spend time in the studio. The Beatles would follow suit. Not long after, the Beatles would also become tired of touring after Brian Wilson did it, and they would also say, we don't want to tour. We want to spend time in the studio creating music.
That's right. And as a result of that, Rubber Soul was the album that was such a fine example of music that just came together in the studio. I mean, the whole recording aspect of that album is just it's pop perfection, and it's so solid and so broad, and and every song is no filler on the album. And I guess when Brian Wilson heard this album, that inspired him to say, well, I am going to make the greatest rock album.
Here comes my response to Rubber Soul,
where there will be no filler. Every song will be special. So but to hear Rubber Soul, and it's ironic that to me, because it's so, to me, I think Rubber Soul might have been the pinnacle of what the Beatles were accomplished. Because if you think about it, what they did after that, they were starting to deconstruct that sound. With Revolver, it was more sparse, more spread apart. It wasn't as full. And then, of course, they went on to do, Sgt. Pepper, which was the ultimate masterpiece, the ultimate statement.
The response to Pet Sounds.
Exactly. Exactly. But, that's when things started going on in the band, where they started going off and doing their own things, and really starting to separate that, whatever it was that came together on Rubber Soul collectively. started to split apart. And then by the time they got to the White Album, then of course they were in different, literally in different rooms doing their own thing. But it just seems strange to me that, Rubber Soul might be that pinnacle of when of a sound that was just so collective and so perfect.
And I think that's what you make a really good point, that
Yeah.
the Beatles were working, even though they had different styles and George Harrison had a different thing, they were all working in a collaborative state, or of the same mind. And that's not what was happening with the Beach Boys. Is you've got basically Brian Wilson and then the rest, or you could say Brian Wilson and Mike Love. And Mike Love famously was attributed with, don't mess with the formula, meaning we do songs about cars, we do songs about surfing. We do songs about girls. And that's our stock and trade, and do not mess with that, because they've had success with it. That's where they made their name. But much like the Beatles with that kind of stuff, She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, they progressed past it and they said, well, we're going to tackle some more serious themes. Norwegian Wood, In My Life. Right. And they start to go towards that. And Brian Wilson was on that same path of, we can say something with music besides the surf is up and grab your girl and go get a soda. Like he was trying to progress towards that, where the rest of the group was basically like, well, this is what we do. And, we're making money. So there was that little, so he didn't have the backing and the collaborative spirit of it. Not that they were against him, but he was starting to go on his own path. And by sending the Beach Boys out on tour, that leaves him alone in the studio.
That's right.
To then in his playground. So that's when he grabs Tony Asher, who was an ad writer and a jingle writer. He was an advertising guy. Not necessarily a lyricist, but they connected somehow, and he got him as a partner to help write these lyrics, and they would have extended discussions about life. And Brian Wilson was not a teenager. He was a young adult. And that's what a lot of this is about is, what's it like to be a young adult and transitioning into manhood or transitioning into responsibilities, and that netherworld where you're not a kid anymore, but you don't really feel like a full-on adult.
That's right. And you're looking to do something and to step into that next chapter of your life. And exploring this through music was the concept of the album. They call it a concept album. It's not a particular story or anything like that, like most concept albums are. The concept is life. It is the blueprint of life, falling in love, falling out of love, the experiences.
Yeah.
And through the music, I mean, it's a sonic experimentation of that. But Tony Asher would add those simple lyrics to a lot of these songs that were just not anything like really that you had to read into, like you really didn't have to decipher them or anything like that. It was so simple. And yet they were also very multiple interpretations.
Yeah.
You could interpret, you could stick, bring it to your own personal experience, or it could be so widespread that it could be something totally different.
Yeah,
and that was it
cut right. Those lyrics cut like right to the heart. Of a lot. And you said, and you really nailed it, where it's done simply. So it's not couched in euphemisms or entendres or whatever. It's pretty much there. It's like, this is what it's like when you're not sure if you fit in. This is what it's like when you're falling in love with somebody and you're not sure. Or this is what it's like when you wish you were just a little bit older and you were an adult and you could spend time with the one you love. It sounds simple, but when you listen to the whole thing, you get the theme. And that's it's like you said, it's not a story about something. It's more, these are thematic elements that this album covers about, transitioning into adulthood. And I think no matter what age you are, I think you can listen to it.
Yeah.
And fall back into some of these, some of the lyrics I really connect to, and some of the, it's not necessarily always the most popular songs, but so Brian Wilson goes into the studio. And one of the things that I don't know if people know a lot about the Beach Boys, but Brian Wilson was veering more and more towards not having the Beach Boys actually play. I mean, he started using session musicians, particularly a group known as the Wrecking Crew. So if in the 60s, if you were an American pop band and you made a record, even if it was like the Byrds or a quote unquote band, the members of the Wrecking Crew more than likely played on it. They were so prolific. There's a fantastic documentary called
Yeah,
The Wrecking Crew.
it is. Yep.
And you'll get the story of these unknown heroes of music that played on literally thousands of records between the group of them. Classics that you would never have thought of. So Brian was using the Wrecking Crew. He had started using studio musicians to get the sound he wanted before Pet Sounds. Now that the Beach Boys are away, it's time for the cat to play.
And now he can really go to town.
He can really go for it.
That's right.
And that's the thing is this. So this is really one person's vision driving this whole thing.
Yeah.
And all the music is in his head. And so he had to earn the trust of the Wrecking Crew because they're used to working with professionals, and they work with Phil Spector and very regimented, and do this, do that, and then this young kid comes in who's booking all this studio time. These guys are getting paid, so they're there. It's not like they're members of a group and say, "Oh, I'm not working today." They're getting paid, so they're showing up for the sessions, and he wins them over. He gets across what he's trying to do with them, and it's just amazing what. How he was able to earn their respect and get them on board. And he did some crazy stuff that would never be done in music, using, giving like two bass players, but having them play in different keys.
Yeah.
One guy gets the sheet music. He looks at it, he goes, this is in a different key than the other person. And he goes, I'm just going to play it. I'm not going to question it. And it worked. So he was not only using the studio as a tool, but he was also expanding what music could be. Combining instruments to make different sounds.
That's right. 3 keyboardists at all times. Sometimes it would be 3 pianos at once, or it could be an organ with 2 pianists. And one of them actually put, I believe, tacks on every key of the piano. So like when you hear that, and you can distinctly hear it in the music, when they hit the key, you could hear this sort of clicking sound happening. Like it was so unusual, but such technique and such like, well, who thinks of this innovative kind of stuff? Yeah, innovative. And
trying. And if you're wondering about what Pet Sound, if you look at the album cover, and it belies what it is, because the record label took the title literally. And the album cover is the Beach Boys feeding these animals at a zoo, and the album's Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds actually means pet as in favorite. And this is a collection of their favorite sounds, their pet sounds. So it's got nothing to do with animals, even though it's an iconic album cover, but it makes it look like it's something that it's different, that it's not, and they took it literally, but
it's very deceptive. You look at this simple album cover and you're like, what is this?
They're feeding sheep, and they're
expecting like some kiddie music or something, like, and that's not not necessarily a wrong assessment, because some of the music is somewhat kid-like in a way. Like he employs some like a sense of
innocence,
of youth, innocence, and the music reflects all of this, and that's what's so, oh man, and all of this in his head, and everybody having to decipher that, and everybody having to really come to terms with this young brainiac just coming in and every day, and really putting them through their paces too.
Yeah,
we're not talking like one take. I think for every song there had to have been like multiple takes, and then no, we want to add this, let's take that out, and he drove them all nuts. They were these,
and he would literally tell them how to play by mimicking the sound or mimicking the tempo from the studio, and trying to get what was in his head out to them. And with this album, and the way Brian Wilson recorded, is he was not like an overdubber. So he wouldn't do things in layers. So if you're talking about the Wrecking Crew, and you're talking about 2 or 3 bass players, a couple of guitar players, Hal Blaine on drums, couple of keyboardists, all these guys have to do everything at the same time.
At the same time.
And if he heard one thing that was off, even though he was mostly deaf in his right ear, he would hear that one thing didn't sound correct in his mind. He would stop, try and explain what it was that he needed to hear, and they would all have to go again. And you can't do that without getting professional musicians.
No. You
because
cannot.
regular band members would be throwing their instruments because these guys are getting paid to do it. And he would just put them through their paces until it matched what it sounded like in his mind.
And try doing that today with today's budgets. And, there's no way anybody could do that today with such a broad group of musicians. And it would
Yeah.
cost an absolute fortune to do that. And, but yeah, I mean, it blows my mind just to think that this is all going through his head, and to be able to pick that out, one person doing something wrong or something off, and everything stops. I mean, God, how does that happen? I mean, everybody agrees that there's something. He was channeling something in his brain that was unlike anything anybody had ever done before. And
I think I think it's the good thing that the Beach Boys were not around, so he had that released pressure of people scrutinizing what he's doing or questioning what he's doing. That would come. It would come later on. But for now, while the Beach Boys were out there touring and spreading the message of the Beach Boys, he was like the mad scientist in the laboratory, creating something totally different that was nothing like. I mean, there was a couple of songs you can pick out that were kind of the lead up to it. Mm-hmm. But like you said earlier, this was a demarcation point, whereas most bands kind of evolve into it. Like you said with Rubber Soul, they kind of work their way into it. This was kind of like almost a full stop of no, here we go. And I'm doing something totally different. And many consider it basically to be a Brian Wilson solo album, because he really was the architect of everything.
What do you think? What's your assessment of that? Do you agree with that, or for the most part?
Much. Or, I mean, I think if he had his way, he would have. I mean, he pretty much sings lead on almost everything.
Yeah.
So there and when Caroline No was released as a single, it was released as Brian Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
It was not released as the Beach Boys. It was released under Brian Wilson's name. So there's a lot of that. And I think that the Beach Boys were also kind of placating him and like, you know what, let's let him do this. Let's just kind of go ahead. We'll play nice, but then if it doesn't work out, and that's, kind of what would end up happening. So Beach Boys returned from the tour. The tracks are pretty much done. And they're like, well, what, because they didn't really know what was going on. They weren't consulted because Brian was writing with Tony Asher. And they come back like, well, what is this? We don't connect with this. What is this talking about?
Mm-hmm.
We're not, again, Mike Love just always seemed to be like the stuffed shirt, like just was not hip to anything, not open to something different. Right. He even had a problem. One of the, the song I Know There's an Answer was originally called Hang On to Your Ego.
Yeah.
And he, the drug reference, it sounds like a trip thing. So, change the lyrics. I mean, the guy couldn't have been more of a stick in the mud, in a group, just trying to, I'm going to say trying to protect his own interests of keeping the Beach Boys successful and not being an artist.
I agree. And I think he was more or less an extension of Brian's dad too. I think his dad was very controlling and very, and he was all about the success. And, he spent more time, worrying about what they were doing abroad, what the band was doing abroad, than what his own son was doing in the studio. Mm-hmm. Otherwise he could have came in and said, hey, you're done. What is this? But because, the Beach Boys were on tour, he would follow their success and their pattern. And I think Mike Love is almost like, his right-hand man in a sense, where he would come in and try to talk Brian out of these things. Like, we're surfing, we sing, like you say, we're surfing music and car music. This is what we need to be doing. What is this, in a sense too, because of his mental issues. I think they didn't know how to handle Brian at this point, because he was being so creative, but at the same time,
so unapproachable or distant.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
And Tony Asher, I was reading a quote that he said, and it was kind of like, Brian Wilson's like a brilliant musician, but an amateur human being. And it sounds mean, but I understand what he meant, that didn't connect well with people like that. And was awkward and kind of uncomfortable, but you put him in that musical environment, and he was able to flourish and produce stuff and sing. Oh my God, his vocals on Pet Sounds alone are worth the price of admission. To hear his soaring vocals on Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder, it's just like, you
Yeah.
know. So
It's it.
Beach Boys come back, right? And if the Wrecking Crew got put through their paces,
Oh yeah.
he was
The
unrelenting with the
vocals,
Beach Boys.
because of
He
the
put them.
vocals.
He was
Yep.
looking for the same exact thing, and that's probably harder because you're trying to get people to sing a certain thing, or I can't even picture what it would be like, even for pros like the Beach Boys. I mean, I don't think anybody could touch the Beach Boys with harmonies and
No,
vocal blends. I mean, they set the standard. They blew the Beatles out of the water. No,
I totally
question.
agree. Their sense of harmony was very specific sound, and it was otherworldly.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was unlike anything you've ever heard. In
So
a
many
sense,
different levels, and
six vocalists at one time. I mean, that's
they're
hard to
moving
do.
notes in between. I mean, they're just doing things that it's not like they're all just singing at the same time. They are, but then they'll, one vocalist will kind of change, go up a note or two or down a note or two in between, and you're getting these crazy blends.
And it had to be perfect. And again, very like we said before, if something was off, we're starting. This is take 100.
Yeah.
it was driving Mike Love bats. He was just I think he was just ready to just kill Brian Wilson at this point.
Because they said said, I think Mike Love famously said that Brian Wilson had like dog hearing, like he was hearing mistakes or things that nobody else was hearing.
Right.
And they're like, no, that sounded fine. Like it sounded better than fine. It sounded great. And he's like, no, it's still not right.
No,
so I'm not sure how that's not going to be well received, I'm sure, as well. If you got someone just keep saying no, you probably get a little animosity thrown your way, especially if you're just singing.
And like I said, a lot of them were probably thinking, well, there's something wrong with Brian. I mean, that had to have been in the headspace there. That they had to have been, it had to be part of the discussion where they're concerned about his mental health at this point. It's like we're not hearing it. We got professional musicians who aren't hearing it. We got the consensus here. I mean, Brian is hearing something that none of us hear. What's going on here? And that had to have been really, really difficult. Yeah. But to concede and to give him that leverage and that ability to control things and to get things done, it was amazing. Yeah. So, it's a credit to, the loyalty of the band and just the family aspect sticking together. Then they got it done.
Yeah. And Brian being able to get it across finally and corral them, and I think one of the beauties of this album is you're actually getting 3 albums in one. If you search it out, you get 3 albums in one. You get Pet Sounds as it was recorded, but you can go on, mostly on YouTube, maybe some of it on Spotify. You can listen to the instrumental backing tracks. That's music on its own that stands to be listened to.
Oh yeah.
The treat is listening to the vocals without the music. And like I said, you literally get 3 albums in one, because I can listen to the album, I can listen to the instrumental tracks, and I can listen to just the vocal tracks because they've all been separated out, because there was a fantastic box set in the 90s, Pet Sound Sessions. It's not available anymore. It's not even on Spotify anymore, so we can't even tell you to go check that out. But on YouTube, there are a lot of the takes from those sessions of just the instrumental thing. And we're going to put we're going to put 2 specifically in the show notes for you to check out. And you're going to hear vocals. And when you just hear the vocals without the music, you can really appreciate the masterpiece and the work that the Beach Boys put in to achieve it.
Yeah. I mean, I almost wish that the entire album could have been an a cappella album. It's called The Stack of Vocals. That was the name of those particular sessions or whatever. And you mentioned the box set, and that's really where my first experience with Pet Sounds came, was that 96 box set.
Really? Me too.
Yeah. Hearing this, hearing this album in stereo for the very first time for their 30th anniversary.
Stop it.
Was something to behold. I mean, of course you'd heard, song, I've heard not in its entirety, and I didn't really appreciate it as much as I should have. But hearing Wouldn't It Be Nice, okay, in stereo for the very first time, I think I played that song like 10 times in a row over and over again.
We
And
never
it just
discussed this, and I was going to get to that. I usually am an advocate for how things were recorded.
yeah.
You leave them. Oh, that's creepy because it's the same exact thing. When I heard the stereo mix of this album, and in particular, Wouldn't It Be Nice? Or you hear the stereo mix of Wouldn't It Be Nice without the instrumentation.
Yeah.
If you don't get chills, I'm gonna have to check you for a heartbeat, because it's the same
Yeah.
thing. Like I'm usually a stickler for the original, but the stereo mix, because of Brian Wilson's loss of hearing, he just mixed in mono, and that's the way Phil Spector did it. It became like this, just one sheet or one
The
like
wall of sound.
wall of
Yeah.
sound of music all
Yeah.
together, no stereo separation. So he was able to control what the mix would. You wouldn't get stereo separation. But for that box set, they went back to the masters, and they, it was all there,
Mhm.
and they remixed it in stereo, and it sounds like a brand new album. And
Yeah.
I remember hearing the vocal version of it, and I literally was almost couldn't speak. I was like, because you're hearing that's just the backing stuff, the we use, and all that stuff that is a little bit buried in the mono mix.
Yeah.
And you can really appreciate what the Beach Boys did as a vocal group. Absolutely stunning.
Yep.
And this was, now people back in 66 were proclaiming this as a masterpiece, hearing it the way it was.
Yeah. And what do I always say about, like, mono recordings and pop recordings in general, is like there's a lot of high end, but even with this, I was so pleased to hear a lot of that bottom end come through on that stereo mix, because even in just the voices, you could hear the bass in the voices,
and it's so crisp and
my
clear.
God. Yeah.
It's just absolutely it's a gorgeous, and I'm going to even advocate, if you're going to pick up the vinyl, get the stereo mix. I don't think you're going to go wrong with it. I mean, it's just absolutely not. Gorgeous. It was so beautifully created and crafted.
It's it's like 2 minutes and 12 seconds of pop perfection.
Yeah.
It is by now, I think it's probably the greatest pop song.
Yeah. It's my favorite Beach Boys song. Wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah.
I kind of got into the Beach Boys, like, I think in the mid '80s they put out a collection called Made in the USA. It was like a greatest hits.
Yes.
And it had that song "Get You Back" on it, which was like a new song by them.
That's
and
right.
That kind of caught my ear. That song, I was like,
I like that catchy song. Yeah.
And so I really wasn't on the Beach Boys thing, and I bought that. And then "Wouldn't It Be Nice," I think, was on it, or maybe even be the first. It's not the first song, but for some reason I connected. I'm like, oh my God, I really love that song. And then kind of put the Beach Boys away for a while. And then the same thing as you, it was like late 90s for some reason, and Brian Wilson's solo album came out in 87 or 88.
Yeah.
I kind of didn't really give it much of a listen. I just listened to one or two songs and shelved it. And then in the mid 90s, they started re-releasing the Beach Boys CDs. They put two albums on one CD, and there's this big push, and
much like the Beatles.
Yeah. I got into Brian Wilson, and then I saw him, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 times, and then picked up the box set, the Pet Sound Sessions. And again, even if you don't listen to any of the studios, the session stuff, it can get a little lengthy, but the stereo mixes are absolutely just amazing.
It's a shame, really, because that it's not. I didn't know it wasn't available anymore. But
it's not on Spotify. It used to be on Spotify and used to have the whole thing. And
I'm such an advocate for. That's why I'm such an advocate for physical media sometimes, because in this particular case, not only is Pet Sounds the album, the masterpiece that it is, but this in itself was probably one of the greatest just case studies of any album. Like, really, they really broke it down with, like, all, like you say, like, it's like 3 albums in one. It's like this whole disc of just vocals, whole disc of just instrumental, multiple takes of one song, but you love all of them, right?
Yeah.
Every there's you got Carl Wilson singing Brian Wilson stuff, and Brian singing Carl stuff, and back and forth, and they were experimenting with trying different it was such a great set. And I had it, and I don't have it anymore, and I don't know what happened to it. And I could kick myself for not having it in my possession.
I have it. I'll sell you my copy.
If I were to, like, I'm sure if I went to buy it today, it would be like $1,000 or something.
I don't know. I didn't even check, but let's get to the music.
Mhm.
Well, let's get to one more thing. Again, this, we talked about this album coming out as a response to Rubber Soul. We mentioned it a little bit, but
Yeah.
the Beatles would hear this, and most particularly Paul McCartney has a very strong affection for this. And he's basically said, "God Only Knows," which is on this album, is probably the greatest song ever written. I mean, he
Yeah.
concedes that to Brian Wilson.
Mhm.
This would, again, it's two bands like communicating with each other through music.
Yeah.
Rubber Soul inspires Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds, they get Revolver out and he's making Pet Sounds. So Pet Sounds inspires Sergeant Pepper because they hear what that, the Beatles hear that and say, wow, what can we do? How can we push further? So I
Mhm.
love that these two bands were just kind of going at it. And unfortunately, Brian Wilson would not be able to sustain it. I mean, that's the thing is his demons got the better of him, and the pressures of the group for him to not continue doing stuff that was unrelatable to them made him an outsider. And I think that also contributed to his problems because he had no support. Whereas
No
the Beatles
support.
were like, all for one for all, do whatever you want. We'll play on it.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy of the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson.
Yeah, his dad in particular. I mentioned his dad
Yeah.
before, and not I don't want to get too much into this, but it's like his dad was really, really hard on him and just treated him like just
Nothing was ever good enough.
Yeah, nothing was ever good enough. When he first heard God Only Knows, he was like, "What is this? What is this pansy type song you're writing? This, And it was an absolute classic. And Paul McCartney. And when I mentioned Paul, and let's get back to that a little bit. I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna throw it out there.
All right, throw it.
And especially after seeing the Get Back documentary, okay, we just talked about that. I would argue that Paul McCartney, because of this, I think that's why he connects with Brian Wilson so much, is because I think Paul McCartney, out of the Beatles, is the most musically inclined. Do you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's the most orchestral and most thinks in that way, whereas John Lennon is more like the straight ahead rocker. And let's get down and dirty with it. And Paul McCartney has those same sensibilities. I mean, you can listen to his later Beatles stuff, on Abbey Road and etc. And it's got a lot of those trappings, and it's got more. His songs are more arranged, right? And that's what Brian Wilson was doing. These songs were arrangements, and Paul McCartney didn't shy away from that, no matter what kind of grief he got from maybe John Lennon. This is sappy, or it's
there's a kinship
corny.
There. I feel like there's a musical kinship there across the pond. The two, I would not disagree with that. That he was the kindred spirit and kind of I see what he's doing and I see the possibilities of what the Beatles can do with that. But putting our spin on it again, they're not. Pet Sounds doesn't sound like Sgt. Pepper. Sgt. Pepper doesn't sound like Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds doesn't sound like Rubber Soul. But
it's
the
just
spirit,
the inspiration,
the spirit,
and how they were kind of pushing each other through musical communication, which is just so great. I mean, we got.
It's a shame that they never came together, and actually, I would have liked
come
to have
together.
Seen...
I see what you did there.
But that would have been
fun.
Really cool to have had them work together, and that's I don't think that ever happened, did it?
No, they're both on Capitol.
Yeah,
they're both on the same label.
So
Capitol was making out like kings.
Yeah,
they had the Beatles in the UK, and then they had the Beach Boys in LA, in California. So they were making money hand over fist with these guys. But yeah, this is one of those ones. Also, it's not a very long album, but you got to sit and listen.
Mm-hmm.
You got to sit and listen to this, and because there's a couple of instrumentals as well. Which you wouldn't think, well, why, so that there's some songs where the Beach Boys are not present at all. And Brian Wilson didn't play on this album either. He was the producer, he guided everything.
Yeah.
And I think you'd be hard pressed. I think maybe they said Carl maybe played some guitar on something perhaps, but you don't really hear of bands doing that either, where the band doesn't play, and they weren't too happy with it, but it was, the results are that you can't argue with the results. You cannot argue with what he accomplished because he wouldn't be able to do it with them.
Yeah. If they had come into this together, there would have been, it would have been a much different album. I think if they had come in and as a group and said, let's do this, it would not have been nowhere near the same result. The vocal alone is probably the most important aspect, in terms of, really dry. And that's where the Beach Boys come in. So in a sense, he's using them as backing musicians.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They are instrument. They are as much an instrument of the studio because again, he as the producer, he's bringing them in and saying, okay, here, these are done, and now we need you to go to work and do this part. So he was like literally like the commander. He finished the backing tracks, and then they came in and laid it down. And yeah, wouldn't it be nice is just the opener, and it's just one of those songs that I think everybody can connect to. If you, like I said, you don't have to be of the age, but you can kind of remember the feelings of when you were younger and hoping and wondering what it's going to be like when you're older. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when you're a man or a woman or whatever, and you're in a relationship, and it's that hopeful feeling. And that's what the album really kind of, for the most part, portrays, is those feelings of hope with love and what's to come.
Yeah,
And
we've all
maybe some
been there.
uncertainty, and
Yeah.
there's definitely some uncertainty about it as well. It addresses that too.
But it could also be, I mean, if you're a cynic, if you could look at the song, like again, I think there's another interpretation there. It's also a warning. Be careful what you wish for sometimes, because we've all been there. We want that life. We want to be married, and when things don't turn out just quite the way, then you look back on that song and you say, hey, there's that naivete of it is gone. That aspect of the song. Yeah. I don't even think there was any naivete to it to begin with. If you just look at it, it's just a hopeful song, sure, but it's not. It doesn't. It's not a sort of a puppy dog kind of just random pop song. There's more to it than that, and then that multiple interpretation there.
I can look at it back. I look at it from the innocent point of view of it, though. I look back at it as you don't know what you don't know yet, right? And that's why it's so romantic to, when you're young, to think about those things, right? Because you haven't experienced the heartache or whatever happens in your life. When you're at that age, you're kind of projecting it. You're projecting the good things,
right? From my own experience, though, it's like I wanted that, though. I wanted to be to grow up so fast, and to just jump in, so decisions were made, but it's just but that kind of thing, and that's what the song speaks to with me, is like just wanting that so much that you're just ready for it, even if you're not ready for it, but so there's that sort of so why are we such in a hurry to grow up, kind of thing, we that's the thing. It's like that's where the cautionary aspect comes into play for me with that song, so
and you get a little bit of that self-doubt in the song "That's Not Me," which I really like that song, even though Mike Love is has the vocal. I just like what it gets across, right? Because it's that self-doubt and about being alone, but then kind of things don't necessarily turn out like you thought they would, and you miss being around people. So these songs really approach things. It's not all just love and happiness. It's approaching that young adulthood from all these different aspects, and he really kind of was able to knock it out of the park with this, really.
But it's told like from the perspective of a young adult, that you feel as if he might as well have been, he could have been 50 years old writing these songs. I mean they don't evoke, like, again, that naivete, that innocence.
It's not
immature. There's a maturity to these, to just because of the music and the lyrics too. Like so yeah. I mean they're genuine. They're true. It's not just some like lollipop type pop stuff, like like a lot of that was going on in the 60s. But
it's not about dating and
exactly,
going taking your favorite girl out and stuff like that.
Right.
It's kind of what happens after that, and what happens when you've outgrown all that. And what is next on the horizon for you. And that's, of course, there's two songs, but really one song that's got nothing to do with all this, and that's Sloop John B.
Yeah,
which is
a
kind of a weird. It's almost like a palate cleanser before you get to side two. And Al Jardine, who's the guitarist for the Beach Boys, was really into folk music, and was really pushing Brian, like, hey, check out this song, we should do it. Do an arrangement of it. And Brian Wilson wasn't a really big folk fan, but eventually, kind of Al Jardine got it in front of him, and then Brian Wilson kind of worked it up into something that was totally different. And oddly enough, Al Jardine auditioned to sing it. And Brian Wilson said, no. Said, I'll do it. So
So
the guy promotes the song and gets him to look at it, and
and he
it doesn't
doesn't
get to
get to
say,
and he
yeah, you're
doesn't
not
get
going
to
to sing
do it. Nope. Nope.
it.
Denied.
Poor Al Jardine.
Yeah.
And then oddly enough, another oddity is the song. There's actually a title track called Pet Sounds,
Mm-hmm.
and it's an instrumental. And if you listen to it without knowing what the title was, it might evoke something, because it was originally supposed to be, or it was submitted as for consideration to be a theme for a James Bond film. The working title was Run James Run, which is James Bond, and it's got that sound to it, and that's what it was supposed to be. Is offered it up for use in a James Bond movie, and so it has a little bit of a surfy sound, but it also has a little bit of that Bond sound that you used to kind of hear back then, and that's really what it was. But then they said, no, we can't. We're not going to use it.
Interesting. I never knew that, and now when I think about it, it's like, yeah, I could totally see, especially the earlier Bond, like Dr. No, and
it's got that swinging kind of sound to it.
That's right. Yeah, that loungy. Yeah,
it's got the horns and everything. So that's what it was supposed to be. But then they said no. So all right, we'll rename it Pet Sounds.
You could definitely see like the graphics on the screen, like the sort of like
like one of those intros,
one of those like Saul Bass, like like what I'm talking about, like those like those animated like fonts coming on, and that's really cool. I never knew that.
That's what it originally was. So so that's kind of an outlier in an interesting way. But again, it fits nevertheless, because the other instrumental is Let's Go Away for a While.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just kind of just really, you want to talk about loungy. 12 violins, 4 saxophones, Coca-Cola bottle used as a guitar slide, just throwing anything against the wall. Again, that's the beauty is he was allowed to experiment unfettered, and just came out with these beautiful, I mean, was he like 20, 24
mm-hmm.
at the time? I mean, just amazing stuff that was in his head that he was able to get out and find people that would work for him and work with him to get it done. And yeah, it's just an album that, I still got, I listened to it, I don't know, like 3 times, not that it was a problem, but I listened to it like 3 times before we did the show. And I still get like those feelings, like, or when I hear, I just wasn't made for these times. It's just, you can kind of connect to those things where you don't feel like you belong sometimes. And, you feel like you're an outsider, even with your friends,
mm-hmm.
even as a, if you're not that age, you still can kind of feel that, or remember if you went through that when you were younger, and kind of connect to it. And it's just what makes it so special, because it's certainly not dated. There's no like stuff of the 60s and groovy and hip, although there is trip. They use the word trip.
The sounds, sure. Of course you could argue that some of the sounds of being played and being, could evoke that time.
Yeah.
But lyrically it's timeless. I mean, that song in particular is my favorite.
Yeah.
That's the one I relate to the most, because I was such an introvert, and and when there's the line, they say I got brains, but they ain't doing me any good. And God, I mean, there's just so, those are, they cut deep, they really do. It's like, it's simple, it's direct, but boy, they really get you, and again, back to the instrumental pieces on the album. I played it for the very, for my oldest son for the first time, and because he was a big Sgt. Pepper fan.
Mm-hmm.
And I played in Pet Sounds, and he had never heard it. And I said, yeah, this album, it one-ups Sgt. Pepper in the aspect that there's not 1, but 2 instrumental songs on this record. So that in itself is something, a feat, like that's who does that? You know what I mean? So, so he was like, oh, like he was kind of, I think he was a little impressed by that, or not. I don't know. I don't know what he thinks of it, but
I know that it all goes to like it all went to just set the table for this. And like I said, it came out and people were like, yeah, all right, I guess next. Like it didn't have, I mean, there were some critics or some people like the Beatles, like, other musicians understood what was going on and respected it.
People
but it just kind of things died on the vine.
yeah, things weren't that artsy yet. There wasn't that much happening on that scene. As I think the Beatles were starting it, but you think about the albums that it came out like in like 67, 68, like people like the Zombies and, Odyssey and Oracle and all these like trippy psychedelic stuff, that came out. They say that Pet Sounds is psychedelic. I don't really see it that
Nah.
way. I wouldn't put that in that box. It's not as trippy to me
and when you look at it through that lens of where things were where the psychedelia was taking over, incense and peppermints and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Pet Sounds can kind of sound weak compared to that. If people are starting to gravitate, and the Beatles kind of were starting to touch psychedelia with, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and they weren't afraid to go there. And the Beach Boys would try, and that was, the pinnacle, one of the greatest unreleased albums ever would be the attempted follow-up. But Pet Sounds was kind of died on the vine. And then in the 70s, people started to reevaluate it. It through the rear view mirror and say, wow, I think, we kind of missed something on this. Like,
that's right.
It kind of evokes a different time. And, I guess after what society was going through at the time and saying, this is something special. And it only grew over time. And like I said, when Rolling Stone put out their first, 500 top albums, it was number 2 and Sgt. Pepper was number 1. I mean, that's pretty much the way it should have been, or the way it was, right? Because one inspired the other, and one was like the run up, and then Sgt. Pepper theoretically was the pinnacle, But then, like we talked about, when they re-released, Rolling Stone redid the list in 2020 or 2021, Sgt. Pepper dropped to like number 13 or somewhere around there, but Pet Sounds stayed at number 2. It did not move. Other albums got shifted around. I think we went through that. I think we went through the top 10 or whatever it was. And all these other albums got shifted around, dropped or whatever. Marvin Gaye's What's Going On took the number 1 spot, but Pet Sounds stayed exactly where it was because it did not falter and it did not diminish under the lens of time. Whereas Sgt. Pepper, might be overblown for the Beatles. Maybe Rubber Soul was better or something. But Pet Sounds stood the test of time.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about more. Sgt. Pepper was more about the musical experimentation, I think, but you really can't connect to songs like Lovely Rita, and you know what I mean. Like that's not a song that you could take and wear it on your chest, and like Pet Sounds. I mean, it's so personal.
I don't know if I could. I don't think I could listen to it with somebody. I'll be honest. I don't know if I could put Pet Sounds on.
That's an interesting point.
And listen to it with somebody. Nothing against anybody. Nothing. I don't know.
But you want it for yourself.
Yeah, I don't know that I could sit there with somebody in another room and putting this on and kind of me kind of experiencing it, and then having somebody else there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know. It's kind of strange.
There are a few songs that I like. Don't Talk, for example. To me, again, Brian Wilson is in his early 20s, and there's that mature aspect of writing a love song, which I could probably consider that to be one of the greatest love songs ever conceived, ever written, because it's so it speaks to this isn't we're now just falling in love, we're not splitting up. It's saying we've been through some shit and we're sticking together, and we don't have to say anything to one another. And for him to have understood that and to evoke that feeling at such an early age is outstanding. It's outstanding to me. It blows my mind. And the naked vocal on that song, the falsetto, and Brian Wilson, by and large, the falsetto is what makes it. I mean, he's got that great falsetto, but I don't think he's such he doesn't have like a really great voice in a sense. I think Carl has the more melodic voice. It's the sweeter voice.
Well, yeah, you get it, and God only knows, right?
I mean, very similar, but I think Carl has the range and the pitch that makes it smoother than Brian's. A little, he can be a little rough around the edges when he's singing in a normal tone.
Yeah,
but that falsetto is like unmistakable.
It sends chills up your spine.
But when he's singing Don't Talk, and it's so naked and it's so vulnerable, and just the emotion that's being evoked there is that gets me every time. That song,
Yeah.
the chills.
Yeah.
So,
And just like I said, I think we got to give some respect to God Only Knows as well, which is
oh yeah.
kind of like the timeless song from them, and one that's endured. And that's Carl Wilson's. That's really the only time we hear from Carl Wilson. But
yeah.
wow, what it's a simple lyric. God only knows what I'd be without you. It's kind of like really simple, but it goes, actually, when you first hear it, it's like, I may not always love you. So
the
you think,
very
well, okay,
first line of that song.
This is not starting off too good, but then
nobody writes that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but
as long as there are stars above you, you'll never need to doubt it. Like, he turns it right around. I may not always love you, but you know what? I'm going to explain why that's not going to be true.
Yeah.
So you really got to
that's life. That it's the truth, right?
Yeah.
You're with somebody for, you're going to have ups and downs. You're going to go, no matter who it is. It could be your wife, your kids, could be your pet, your dog, or your parents. Like, that's what I'm saying. It's so universal in that, and it's a broad sense there, but it speaks to everyone. And like I said, I don't care what musical background you might have in a lot of groups. You could be be in the biggest punk band or metal band. I think anybody could identify with this record. Everybody could identify with this record.
Now here's the thing. He was at the time of these sessions, they recorded Good Vibrations.
Yeah.
And it was considered to, they were going to put it on in place of Sloop John B. They were going to put Good Vibrations on this album. Do you think it would fit?
I think so.
Really?
I always wanted it to be on Pet Sounds because I love that song in itself is a masterpiece.
Yeah, I don't think it fit. I think it
really
it fits outside of it because they had started. I think that was really starting to do something. I think it has more in common with what he was going to do with Smile than it does with like Pet Sounds. I think it's like that. It was that next evolution of going to the nth degree of getting a sound and doing stuff. And
I think it's definitely a step up.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. I mean, if believe it or not, I mean, how do you step up Pet Sounds? But there it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the thing is the Beatles respond with Sgt. Pepper. So Brian Wilson's like, well, I've got something up my sleeve. So he ditches Tony Asher and he hooks up with Van Dyke Parks, who was another lyricist, very abstract. And their project was going to kind of be more of an Americana type travelogue about the United States called Smile, and it totally fell apart. Like, the backlash came in because Pet Sounds didn't do what it was supposed to. So it's now it's like, well, we have to exert some control over Brian, and he was getting more and more erratic. Sessions were getting crazier and crazier. He was, lighting fires in the studio to try and get a certain feel for stuff he was doing. Everybody had to wear fire hats. So he really started to kind of become a little erratic, and Smile became an obsession. The sessions went on forever and ever with snippets of stuff being created that was supposed to be stitched together, but they weren't figuring it out. And then finally, Brian just kind of cracked. Like, the pressure became too much. The whole project got abandoned. He never wanted to hear anything from it, never wanted to look at anything from it, and was like, kind of like, it doesn't exist anymore. And the Beach Boys would put out, Smiley Smile, which was some fragments of it. And then the Beach Boys would evolve. But, Brian would recede from the Beach Boys for the most part, and the Beach Boys would have to find their own way. And they were able to reinvent themselves. They eventually kind of, became a different group and had to find their own identity without Brian, because he was basically in the band, but not really present. And when he was, it was very reluctantly.
Yeah. And he would contribute maybe, one or two good songs,
or something that was old that he had hanging around, and they would regurgitate it. So he was real. And then things got worse through the 70s. He got really in bad shape, got hooked up with a therapist that was absolutely taking advantage of him and just isolating him, drugging him up. Finally got free of that in the 90s and kind of started emerging again, started touring, started record. He's very prolific, right? He records. Like I said, I saw him on tour a bunch of times. Actually shook his hand.
Yeah, you did.
I took advantage. I
tell that story. Go ahead. Tell the full story.
Where did I go see him? We went to go see him at, this is one of my famous things, is he was opening for Paul Simon at Jones Beach.
Yeah.
So I got tickets, and the intention was not to stay for Paul Simon. The intention was to see Brian Wilson. So, and he was doing like a little, like after his set, like he opened, so then he would go back and like, sign merchandise or whatever. So I don't care, Paul Simon's on whatever. So I go back over there and he's like in this little table area and he's like signing posters. And I get my poster and I, give it to him and he signs it. And then I just put my hand out and I grabbed his hand. Like this was as close as I was ever going to get to him. Yeah. I'm like, I had to go for it. I just like shook his hand. I said, thank you, and then that was it. I was done. Like you didn't have to, we left. I was like, great. I don't need to really do anything else with it.
That's great.
So I actually got to see him. He took Pet Sounds out on a symphonic tour. So wherever he would be, he would get a local orchestra and they would play all of the stuff. So I got to see him do Pet Sounds with all with a symphony, with all the instrumentation and arrangement the way it was supposed to be. I got to see him do Smile in its entirety when he finally did release Smile in the 2000s and put together that masterpiece. I got to see that as well. So nothing but love for Brian Wilson and everything that he's done.
To hear that album in its original context was interesting for me.
For what? Smile?
For Smile.
Yeah.
Because
I
absolutely love, of course, Good Vibrations, but ironically, they changed the lyrics a little bit on the song for Smile. But I absolutely love Surf's Up. That's like one of my all-time favorites. And, that appeared on the self-titled album Surf's Up. And that's when I think when they were starting to get a little psychedelic, but it was the early 70s though. So like Feel Flows and songs like that. And Till I Die was another masterpiece too. Yeah. I love that one. But hearing Smile for the first time, I didn't know what to make of it. Honestly, I really, they're talking about vegetables and
I loved it,
and just it's just very, very odd. It took a while for me to warm up to that record. A little bit more than Pet Sounds because it was just so such a it was such a contrast to what I was used to on Pet Sounds. So
if Mike Love hated it, I loved it. And he really disliked Van Dyke Parks, who was the lyricist. He just didn't get the abstract stuff. And they shelved it. And then in the early 2000s, members of Brian's backing band kind of convinced him, like, let's take a look at this. So they got all the tapes. They reached out to Van Dyke Parks, who was the lyricist. They said, do you remember some of this? Or what do you remember what song was going to go with what? And he had all of his notes. So they got together, and Brian reluctantly at first, but then they re-recorded it and they stitched it together the way that they remembered it should have been. And then since then there's been an official release of the original Smile with that in that track order and everything. So, and for a long time it was like the greatest unreleased album ever. It's like the What If, it's like the first What If.
Yeah.
I love that kind of stuff. This would have supplanted Sgt. Pepper. And I firmly believe that had it come out at that time, it was just trippy and psychedelic enough, but still melodic and interesting that it just might have done it. He might have been able to pull it off, but he didn't have the support. He was having the emotional issues. He said the album scares me. I can't listen to it because he was so freaked out. He didn't want to hear it, and it just kind of really threw him for a loop. But it's all there now, and that's the great thing is this stuff is available.
It's like facing your demons, right? It's like facing your fears and putting it together, and that's great. And I wish other artists had the opportunity to do that. We talked about The Who with Lifehouse, and that was supposed to be their big masterpiece, and that thing. And I think they're actually working on something at this point. I think Pete Townsend is planning something with it, but
he should. Sometimes you got to close that chapter.
You have to
finish it out. If it's unfinished or you felt that it didn't get the due.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not like Brian Wilson felt it didn't get its due. He was just done. He was just afraid to listen to it. He just didn't want to approach it. And because it became so legendary, it was this legendary unreleased album, bootlegged, the sessions bootlegged over and over, figure out your own order, arrange it however you like.
Yeah.
That, you're asking for trouble by trying to embrace it. But Van Dyke Parks was there. They got together, they got the notes, they reconstructed it and re-recorded it. And I remember listening to it when it came out, and I'm like, oh, I was absolutely satisfied. I was like, I was so happy for him as well. Like 40 years later, almost 40 years later,
And he
to
got
be
some
able to
great
face.
people to play on that record too.
Yeah,
Some great
his backing
singers.
band are
And
pros. I mean,
yeah,
they really replicated.
yeah,
They did justice to what the Beach, certainly not to the level of the Beach Boys, but they came close enough to replicate what the spirit was. And
hmm
I haven't listened to it in a while, but I think I may after this. I think I haven't listened to it in a while, but
yeah,
so good. So, and I'm
yeah,
so happy for Brian Wilson that he was able to come through everything. He was probably pegged as a rock and roll casualty, and he really was for a long time. He was written
yeah.
off. I mean, he was a mess.
Yeah, it went, everything that happened to him, and some of it not even to that he wasn't even in control. The
Yeah,
idea of not being in control of your own life, and
yeah.
and having somebody control your life for so long too, and having
Captive in yourself,
held
in your own
captive,
mind.
exactly, and the rest of the band just sort of like letting it happen for so long too
Yeah,
was a shocker too. And
yeah.
then of course the late 80s, we talked about that first solo record, which in itself is interesting. I remember that kind of got
I love it
me.
now. And that for me, it's a masterpiece now.
Exactly. When it came out, I found it, because it was so odd and so weird, that I
Yeah,
said, this is not the Beach Boys. I get what people are saying about Brian Wilson,
yeah.
right? Because it's so unlike Beach Boys music. That's when I kind of became interested in him, and then
Hmm.
of course '96, the box set.
Yeah,
But I remember getting that. I remember having the VHS of the all the American Band documentary.
yeah,
I had that,
yeah.
and
There's
I
a lot
bought
of great
at
documentaries
that
about
time
them.
the biography came out, the controversial true story, and
Yeah,
that's what I really. And it was so intriguing to learn about all. I had no idea that any of this was actually happening to him, and and then of course this would later be again be revisited with the film Love and Mercy,
yep.
which I thought was great. But I think I really liked the soundtrack.
Hmm.
We talked about this a little bit as well. Atticus Ross, who was partnered with Trent
Trent
Reznor from
Reznor.
Nine Inch
Yep.
Nails, and he managed to capture what Brian Wilson might have been thinking and what was going on inside his
Hmm.
head sonically. And I think that soundtrack is so brilliant, but the way he did it, and Brian Wilson endorsed it. He said,
Yeah.
"Yeah, this is it.
Yeah,
This is
and
pretty
that
accurate."
movie's a great companion piece to this because
Yeah,
it deals with what he was doing during Pet Sounds. Like
those
it's told
very
it's
two
told in two
specific
halves.
times.
Yeah,
Yes, the
it's
Pet
told
Sounds
in
at his
yeah,
most creative, and then at his absolute most vulnerable and
yeah,
most sort of almost self-destructive in a sense. But and
yeah,
interesting enough, that's the time when you and I got into Brian Wilson, is
yeah.
those two specific time periods. So it was
Yeah,
so cool
I
that
mean,
they nailed that.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be redundant, but I have to admit, I got into Brian Wilson because Jeff Lynne produced one of the songs on his album and co-wrote
I
it.
was waiting for it.
The brilliant "Let It Shine,"
I was waiting for
and
it.
then I also read that my other favorite honey, Lindsey Buckingham, also wrote and produced a song for the album. So I bought the album and it wasn't on there.
Yeah, it didn't make
But
the cut.
it was the B-side of the Love and Mercy single. It was
Yeah.
so weird. And that's when Lindsey Buckingham was really in his like Beach Boys mode too. And there was
Yeah.
a documentary about there was a behind the music about Lindsey Buckingham, and they interviewed Brian Wilson, and he's like, Lindsey Buckingham is insane. So for Brian Wilson to say that Lindsey Buckingham is insane, that kind of shows
Yeah.
you, he's very simpatico. He's very much influenced by the Beach Boys, and you can hear it in a lot of his music. But check out Love and Mercy is a great companion piece to listening to this album. There's a lot we covered a lot of territory.
Yeah.
We hope it made sense. Listen to this album. Listen to it by yourself. Listen to it with somebody. I think if you listen to it by yourself and you just listen to the music and the words, I think you'll get something out of it. I really do.
I definitely agree. And if the music is sort of weird to you, then please seek out the vocal arrangements of this.
Yeah.
Go on YouTube, try to find it. Try to find the acapella, the vocal. I think it's called Stack of Vocals.
Yeah.
If that's how they were titled on the box set, released, the track listings. If you could find just the vocal of "Wouldn't It Be Nice?"
Well, we're going to do it. I'm going to put that in the show notes. I'm going to put
great.
I'm going to put the vocal only of "Wouldn't It Be Nice" in the show notes, and I'm going to put the instrumental only of Wouldn't It Be Nice in the show notes. So you can kind of listen to those because everyone knows the song pretty much.
Yeah.
If you listen to our podcast, you're probably listening to classic rock and all that great stuff. So we'll link those two in the show notes, and you could just listen to some just amazing performances, and just listen to that. Just listen to the instrumental, and you can hear all these different musicians playing, and all these different sounds being made. There's a an accordion and this timpani drums that have great reverb on it, and Hal Blaine just anchoring everything, and just so much stuff going on. It's almost an overwhelming like senses when you listen to the track by itself, because there's just so much there to digest that you take it for granted when you hear the song with the vocals and the music. You just kind of take it for granted, but when you hear them separately, each one is a masterpiece.
Yeah. And listen with headphones.
There you go.
It'll do it just. And if you don't get chills, I don't know. I don't know what
Eric's
to say.
going to come over with the paddles and give you shock and get your heart
I might
going.
start crying. You're gonna make me cry if you're not moved by,
absolutely,
just the, if it doesn't give you chills, then I don't know what else to say. Then
it doesn't give you chills, go sit in a refrigerator.
Right.
That's the only way you're going to get them.
No, not to be mean or anything. It's just you don't. I don't know. I guess you're just not musical. I guess, or so, whatever.
All right, but Eric said it. This has to affect you.
Put it out there. Yeah,
he's laying it down, and I'm laying it down too. This is one that we've waited for a long time to talk about this. We've brought it up every so often, and we just kind of kept keeping it at arm's length. But as we approach our 1-year anniversary, we're ready to share one of the ones that we absolutely love.
Yep,
and we are more than happy to talk about this one.
Yep.
And let you know how we feel about it. And hopefully, and this is what this podcast was about, is letting people know how we feel about these things, what it means to us, what the experience means. And that's the great thing about music, is sharing these experiences. We love to hear about that as well too.
Yeah.
And this is a good way to kind of tie it up, is let us know if and when you do listen to Pet Sounds. Hit us up on social media. We'll have a post with the episode link. So let's start a conversation there.
We would love to hear from you.
Yeah, and let
absolutely.
us know. Does it? Hey, listen, if you don't like it, that's fine too. It is not for everybody, but it connected to both of us, oddly enough, separately. We never talked about it. We never listened to it together, but we came to it, on our own, and got the same thing out of it, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of music, and that's the beauty of sharing and talking about music, and that's what we do each week. And we thank you for joining us on this very special trip about a very special album that's near and dear to both of our hearts. So find us on social media.
Getting verklempt. Getting dear.
I'm not crying. You're crying. I'm not crying. You are. So hit us up on social media, 3324 podcast. You'll find us on Facebook and Instagram if you use that. Let's get the conversation going about this. We would love to hear you and your thoughts about it. And we'll probably even post the instrumental versions on our group as well. So even if you don't want to go into the show notes, we're going to put it out there for you to check out, and we'll probably throw some comments as well. So thank you for joining us for this episode. Much appreciated. Thank you. Again, we're coming in on our year celebration, so thank you for your support. It's been nothing but fun and a great ride.
Yep.
So we're going to leave it there. For Eric, this has been Dean, and we will see you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.